as Tina mentioned, Karen Moore is my wife of 2,097 days, which I thank God for every day. And she's written 120 books, both adult and children, all traditionally published. And as we were talking to a friend this morning, she's kind of slacking off this year because she's only had 3 published. One we hope is still going to be published, and we'll talk about this in a little bit. It was due September to be published in September, but as you all know, most of book publishing is shut down still. The New York houses are not opening. Some are opening in after Labor Day. Some are not opening until January, which means everybody's working at home. And publishing is a collaborative effort. So it's very difficult to get creative collaboration if the only option is Zoom or phones. So everything is kind of slowing down. So we don't know when Karen's book, which is supposed to come in September, is going to be published. The publisher doesn't know. Fortunately, it's a great title. It's still possible. So the times are right. It's a big publisher, Thomas Nelson in this case. But they never shipped their spring. They never shipped their spring titles. The publishers never shipped their spring titles. So all those titles are sitting in a warehouse ready to be released when the stores open. So this is a difficult time. We're going to work our way through it, but I think it's an appropriate time to be talking about all the options for publishing. And what better way to begin the first day of summer than to join a fellowship with creatives called to share your messages with the world, which is more possible today than it's ever been in history. Think about that. It's easier today to share your words than it has ever been in history. That's right. As hard as you've heard it is to be published, and we'll talk about that in a little bit, between the World Wide Web and social media, you are literally a keystroke away from billions, not millions, billions of people who are desperately searching for meaning, clean entertainment, trustworthy information, and above all, meaningful connections. Now that we know the means are literally at your fingertips, we're going to talk about mission, we're going to talk about media, we're going to talk about master, and we're going to talk about message. Before exploring the process, let's just review a little history. When God had a word to share with his children, what was the first method he used? A tablet. It was a stone tablet, but it was a tablet. And he etched in that stone tablet that was kind of portable, although I kind of picture Moses having a hard time going up and down that hill with stone tablets. But it was portable, and it would keep his words for generations. Not unlike our tablets today with digitized content that will last forever, which is a little scary when you think about last forever, but it will. Paper's not going to disintegrate. Rather, digitized content is not going to disintegrate as paper tends to over the generations. After creating the 10 Commandments and using stone as that means for delivering his content, what other means did God use to share his guidance for people to learn and to follow him? He entrusted his words to prophets, men and women who walked with him, and who he entrusted with his word to lead and guide hearers into being doers. Over the years, these stories were written down on scrolls by trusted scribes and disciples for the next generation, and later letters from the apostles to churches. Finally, God called up writers like each of you and inspired them to write daily devotions, prayers, stories of his wonders, resources to strengthen, encourage, edify, and affirm. Each of you walks in these footsteps of Moses, Job, David, the prophets, the apostles, and authors of ages past, called to listen for his still small voice, sometimes just a whisper. And your mission is to tell the stories God gives you. We're going to go back and forth here because I'm a publisher editor. That's what I do. but Karen writes these books. She's one of you. So from time to time, we're going to be going back and forth. If you watch football, I'm the play-by-play. Karen's the color commentator. So I'm going to ask Karen to talk about this feeling of the call and the sense of responsibility that goes along with it.
I think each of us at different points in our life got that little stirring within us, that idea that somehow you were being led, at least, to do some writing. And you probably tried not to listen to it initially. Or you said, oh, it can't be me. And God said, why not you? And so then you had to rethink it and keep examining it. And as with me, I started way back as a little kid doing this kind of writing thing that wasn't something my family did. That was, foreign to my family as a group. But it kept going so that eventually one day I found myself being a writer at a company called American Greetings. And I ended up publishing 15,000 greeting cards. And I thought, wow, I guess I could write, these little things, these little sayings. That's something I could do. And it wasn't until I was moved from that to being asked by somebody from Funk and Wagnalls, the Writer's Digest, Writer's Market people, if I would do a book called You Can Write Greeting Cards. And I said, well, sure, I know everything about that. I mean, I've been doing it for years. This is what I do. Easy. Well, I learned that the mission was different now because I had to learn how to write a book. I didn't know anything about writing a book. I had never written a book. This was 1998. So for 20 years, I have been writing ever since. But it was that greeting card thing that kind of called me into a mission, that got me into writing a book, that eventually got me to understand that I had learned how to write succinctly. I had learned how to say something in a few words that was meaningful, and it led me into becoming a devotional book writer. So I think we have to keep remembering that our mission changes, the call changes, what we can do changes, and what we have to do is keep believing in ourselves to say, but I've never done that, and then say, push right on through that and go, but I will do it. That's what we want to do.
So before we talk about the media, and I don't mean media in the sense of multimedia. When I say media, I'm talking about the platform, the delivery form that that your message is going to be distributed on. But before we talk about that, I'd like to get back to the beginning. Each book you'll ever write, each column or blog you'll post, each tweet you'll share, book or movie, screenplay you'll review, or movie screen that you'll review, novel, poem, or song you'll write, screenplay you might write. God gives you a message, and I'll call that message an idea. When a book publisher contracts for we call it publishing a book, what they're really contracting is to take the message, to take the idea of the author, and this is a word we use that's not pejorative, but to exploit in every possible form, on every possible media platform, all around the world, that idea. They're not just contracting for a 200-page book. They're contracting for the idea that you are putting into, initially, probably a book form. But if they're a magazine publisher or if they're a website, then that would be the medium that the idea would come on. But nobody limits, and you shouldn't, the medium that your idea can appear on. Whether it happens in the shower, sitting in your favorite rocker on the porch, walking in a meadow, on the beach, or alongside a creek, sometimes even in your writing place, when God has set that flame, you can't quench. You pick up your pen or pencil or a keyboard and you start taking notes. And God's ideas can be little. Think about Obadiah, Philemon, practice in the presence of God, or the prayer of Jabez. Or they could be really, really big. Think about Genesis, Job, the Psalms, Isaiah, Gospels, Romans, Hebrews, Revelation, Pilgrim's Progress, Mere Christianity, Purpose-Driven Life, more recently, Jesus Calling. Little or small, God has a specific purpose and a plan for each idea he entrusts you with. And you, as a good and faithful servant, your job is to speak it, write it, and share it. And he promises to equip you with everything you need to accomplish his purpose for that idea. You're not doing this alone. You're not doing this alone. It's a solitary work, writing, but you're never alone while you're doing it. He promises to equip you with everything you need to accomplish his purpose for the idea he gives. He also expects you to use the resources he provides, fine-tune your gifted skills, and take very seriously your responsibilities, because he will ask you someday. Listen carefully. He will ask you someday, like the parable of the talents, what did you do with those ideas that I gave you? I'd like Karen to chime in on this very thought.
Sometimes when you have ideas and you think they're brilliant, and of course I usually say, well, that's, a really great idea. I bet I should do something with it. And one of those ideas that I worked on for a long time was called Living the Heart-Shaped Life. It was so clear to me what it was. I was going to do this Christian living book about how you can live heart first, go out in the world, show people who you are as a Christian, shine your light, and everybody was going to live happily ever after. And oh joy, that was going to be great. And so I gave it to my agent, this guy over here, and we sent it out to, 30 publishers, and every one of them turned it down. And I went, what's going on? They don't have a heart? They don't get, and they would say things like, well, we just don't get what you want to do. We don't get where this is going. And I found it extremely at first disconcerting, because I thought I had this great idea. And then, I prayed about it. I came back, and God said, we're not done with that idea. And so I went back to the drawing board, and I said, okay, what if I turn it into a devotional? Because that's kind of my heart. It is what I do, and perhaps it's what people will understand. So I took an idea that I'd written all this huge kind of a body of work, turned it into a new format. We sent it out again. It got picked up immediately as a devotional book. And then it's become, since then, 6 books that have morphed into a promises book and a journal and, a prayer book and so on. So I just would say, when you get an idea, if it doesn't work the first time, it doesn't mean the idea was not right. It just means you have to find who you are as the writer, add your voice to what you do well, and it'll happen.
So properly humbled, challenged, and perhaps feeling a little bit like Moses and Isaiah and Jeremiah, who you'll remember asked God if he was sure that they were the ones that he wanted to use. Moses couldn't talk. He had this stutter problem. I can't do this. Isaiah had some other personal issues that he felt would be in the way of standing up and speaking for God. And we know one of my favorites was Jeremiah, who said, I'm too young. I mean, I'm not the guy. You must have somebody else. God said no. In each case, he knew who the right person was to tell his story. And he knows, because he's given you ideas, that you are the right person to write and share that message. So let's review the media to publish those ideas that you get out of your mind and your heart. When you get that, as Jeremiah said later, that fire in your belly that you can't stop thinking about this idea. You can't put it down. You might go away from it for a bit, and it just keeps coming back, and it keeps noodling at you. So when you get that, then it's up to you to seek wise counsel on ways your idea, God's idea, can be presented to the readers whose hearts are already being prepared. I believe that God, once he has given you an idea, he's at work preparing the hearts of the readers who eventually are going to see what you've written. That's a pretty exciting. Again, I'm not an author; I'm an editor by trade. But for an author, that's a pretty exciting thing to think about. So your idea can be communicated on one medium or a variety. And I'm just going to give you a quick list just to cast a vision for you to think bigger and bigger. Yeah, it could be a book, but it could be a book that's a printed book. It could be an ebook, and it can be an audio book. It could be a blog. It could be an article, either print or digital. It could be a newspaper column. Karen's first week of July or second week of July starts a column in the Alabama Baptist weekly newspaper on daily devotions. So she's now going to be a columnist, which we never really thought about. A magazine or a newsletter, either printed or digital. We talked about greeting cards, again, printed or digital. You can post on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Pinterest, and all the rest of the social media platforms. Merchandising, you may not think about this, but mugs, apparel, artwork, home decor, mouse pads, stickers, all of those are platforms that an idea can be communicated on in part or in whole. Calendars, apps for phones and social and what you call tablets. Thinking big movie or documentary. Karen's written a screenplay for children's movie that she's working on. As simple as a ringtone. I mean, it just goes on and on and on. Sometimes even your idea has appeared in one of these, and it could be aggregated into a new product all by itself. And that would be an example of combining columns or combining blogs. A great way to get started is to get into a regular blog posting on a subject and then pulling those blogs together into a single volume, into a book. Publishers like to see that you're getting traction in social media, gives them a sense that your idea has stickiness. So that's another development that we have today in terms of taking content on one platform and putting it together and presenting it on another platform. The point is, you need to always be thinking bigger about even a small idea. You know, that the prayer of Jabez was about 60 pages, but it only had about 6,000 words. It sold 15 million copies. 15 million copies. So no idea is too small and no idea is too big, but all ideas can be bigger if you think in terms of how it can be shared with the audience. You might, Karen, talk about what they did with that, both the What a Great Word daily devotional published last year by Hachette and Heart-Shaped Life published 3 years ago by Barbour, which is a company I started 35 years ago.
But I published before I knew him. I just want you to know. Heart-Shaped Life was the one I just told you became a devotional, and yes, they turned it into a promise book and a prayer book and a 3-minute devotional, a smaller book, and a journal, and so they've continued to use it. One other time with another company called Christian Art Gifts, I did a book called Becoming a Woman of Worth. And it was one of the first books I did with them. But that year when it launched, they did mugs, they did jewelry, they did bookmarks, they did prayer cards, and they did a whole end cap of amazing things to help show the brand possibility. And even though Christian Art is a company that typically will not do a book over again, that book has been published
Reprinted.
Three or four different times with what they do is repackaged with a different title. So it went from Becoming a Woman of Worth to You're Worth More Than Rubies, they called it. And then it went from You're Worth More Than Rubies to You're Blessed. And so they changed it again, repackaged it every time. It looked like a new book. So that's one of the things that they do. when we speak at writing conferences, I've actually done a workshop for writers because one of the things we find when we do the one-on-one 5-minute sessions, writers bring us what they're doing, is that most of the time people are not thinking big enough. They're not saying to themselves, what else? If it doesn't become a book, which is the thing they're most focused on, but if we say to them, what else could this be? Could you launch it in a different way than you're thinking about right away, right now? And I can tell you in my years of working at American Greetings, one of the things I learned, this is a gift to me, I felt, because every product we did, we would sit around in a group in every department, the gift wrap side, the greeting card side, the poster people, the plaque people, the mug people, the sticker people, the bookmark people. Everybody would be in that room and we would say, what can I do with this? What can I do with this? Well, publishers today don't really do that for you, but you can do it. You can be that person. You could go in there like you've got different hats on for each of those, and it will grow your idea in ways that you haven't considered before. I tell you that honestly, it will.
Publishers today, as opposed to when Tina and I first met, which was probably 10 or 12 years ago, in that 10 or 12-year period, we have lost thousands of bookstores, thousands of bookstores. And in those losses are tens of thousands of feet of bookshelf. And when you're talking about book publishing in a traditional form, the retail location is where most of those printed traditional books are going to be were distributed. Today, there is no Borders. Borders took up 1/3 of most publishers' print runs. First print run, if it was 10,000 copies, Borders got 3,000. Now, Barnes & Noble picked up some of that, but not all. Some of it was just lost. And since then, we've lost Family, which had 350 stores, the largest chain for Christian books. We've lost Lifeway, which was the Southern Baptist chain that had about 150 stores. We've lost 2 or 3 wholesalers that were gobbled up by another wholesaler called Ingram and then shut down. And Amazon has come along, and Amazon sells now almost 50% of every title's sales. In some cases, 60%. On the one hand, that's pretty cool. But it also means that browsing, which has been the #1 reason people buy books, they just get into a store, book lovers, they get into a store and they look around. Well, it's hard to browse at Amazon. And so publishers now who used to have 4,000 or 5,000 Christian bookshops and 12,000 general interest trade shops that would have had Christian book sections, they now have under 700 Christian bookstores and no national chain. And on the secular trade side, they have about 1,500 stores. Barnes & Noble being the largest. Barnes & Noble has it used to have a big Christian department. It was second in volume only to their fiction department. But they were purchased last year by a new group. They're going through a complete renovation of their buying and marketing process, which we're concerned is going to limit the number of Christian titles that they carry. And of course, most of them are still closed. We don't know when they're going to open nationwide anyway. So my experience, my world of publishing goes over that 40-year period, and seeing the shift from this retail environment that existed 10 years ago to a totally different retail environment today, when half of the books are going to be sold by an entity that I have a hard time as a publisher promoting through with any sense of control. In the old days, remember, as consumers, you would see price pointing. For example, if you ordered you could, for the first month or two, you remember you could get a book for a few dollars less than it was going to be a month later. I think we called that price point. You had stickers on books. You could have, as a publisher, a great marketing and media launch. But the books had a street date. The stores were restricted from putting the books out until they had all their media, everything organized. And then on June 22nd, the books go out, all the media starts, and it's marvelous. Amazon destroyed all of that. As soon as Amazon gets a book in the warehouse, they ship it. Publishers have no control. Publishers have no control over Amazon pricing. So when a book is put out that they would like to see a price of about $15 or $20, Amazon knocks it down by 30 or 35%, which really affects other retailer merchandising opportunities. So if you feel that your idea is best presented in a book form, which is my world, then you need to master your understanding of book publishing, which is why we're here today. There's 3 categories, and all of them have pros and cons, and all of them have a particular kind of book or a particular kind of an author that makes them just right for that idea. There's what we call the traditional model, which is royalty driven. You sign a contract, you give all of the rights except the copyright, which you retain, but you give all of the rights to exploit and develop the copyright, which is back to that idea, to the publisher. When we sign a mortgage, it's for 30 years, most, unless you do a 15-year. But when you sign a publishing agreement, it's for the life of the copyright, which is your life plus 70 years. You hear me? Your life plus 70 years. So as soon as you sign a publishing agreement with a traditional publishing house, you are giving that entity the exclusive right, the title, to design, to price, to decide the format, to decide which languages they'll license it to, whether they will do an audiobook or not. All of those decisions, when you sign a publishing agreement, go to the publisher forever. And when the book is no longer able to be printed at a price that works for the consumer, in other words, they can't print enough copies to get the unit cost down to support a reasonable retail price, then they put it out only as an ebook, which means that your book now is not available in printed form forever. And in the old days, and if you say that too often, then you know you're getting old. But in the old days, when a book couldn't be reprinted because it wasn't selling enough copies, then there wasn't anything else for the publisher to do, so they reverted the rights. They sent the rights, gave the rights back to the author. Today, as long as that title is in a digital base, which they all are, then they define publishing as available for purchase. And an ebook will always be available for purchase. So you can't get the rights back anymore. So a traditional model, now you say, well, Guy, why would I want to do that? Well, you'll get royalties on every one of those exploitations that they will do. So every time they sell anything in any form, whether it's print or audio or digital, or they do a movie on it or whatever it is, you'll get a royalty for the rest of that copyright. So that's an upside. You won't have to pay anything. As an author, you don't pay anything to a traditional publisher to do the editing and the printing and the marketing. So that's an upside. But there's a price to be paid in terms of your flexibility for to use that content, because you can't, all the 120 books that Karen has contracted with publishers, she can't use that content in another form because she's already licensed it to the publisher worldwide exclusive. So it's a very important consideration as an author. This is to consider, is the traditional model what's best for me and for my idea, God's idea? The other little bit of a drawback is that if you're in a place where you're speaking or you have an ability to sell books off of your website, off of your speaking engagements or whatever, maybe you have a business where you could sell books as part of your business. When you buy books from a traditional publisher, I think the best deal we have is about 60% off of retail, which means that a $20 book is going to cost Karen Ann 12. Or sorry, it's going to cost her 8. Well, $8 is a lot of money. She has to buy 50 or wants to buy 50. So the traditional model, upside, you don't have to pay any money to get the book published. Downside, you're giving up all the rights. And to buy your own books back for your own purpose, it's expensive. It's expensive. The second option, go ahead.
I just want to chime in on the upside, though. There's a couple of other, from the author's view, at least to me, that is an upside. One is that I know that any book that I get published through a traditional house has been vetted by that house. Mm-hmm. They have a team of people who went through it. They looked at the possibility of it doing well in the marketplace. They looked at it doing well for the audience I had in mind. So they have gone through and they have created a great scenario for me that I wouldn't have understood probably as well as I do today if they hadn't done the work they did inside that house to get it done. They also have given me opportunities to look at my book cover design and weigh in. Do I like it? Do I think it needs something else? To look at the design of the book itself. Is it meeting the need I had in mind originally? So when you work with your team of editors, your team at the publishing house, they want your book to be a success. They're invested in it. They spent all the money. So in that case, it's not just, here's, I only am going to get royalties. Actually, I'm getting a lot of support. And even the new book I have coming out this fall, I just got my information from Thomas Nelson saying, we want to do a Zoom conference on the marketing and what are the things that we can do to help get this book out there. So they work with you. They're partners with you. And I think it's an important thing to realize that does make it something that, for me, I've always appreciated.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And we'll be able to answer all your questions when we finish here in a few minutes. The other option the other two options. One is called hybrid publishing, and a hybrid publisher is one who is able to get books in bookstores and pay royalties on those books that they sell to bookstores, and you as the author retain all the rights, except the right to sell to bookstores. So the author retains all the publishing rights to do whatever you want to do with your book, is also able to purchase books pretty close to cost. So instead of $8, you might be able to buy them for $2 or $3 and sell them through your channels. And if you buy a $20 book for $3, your royalty, if you work with a traditional house, is going to be about $1.50. But your margin, if you publish it through a hybrid house and you buy that book for $2 and you sell it for $20, it's $18. So again, for the right author, the right idea, a hybrid house where you want the books available in bookstores, You don't want to pay for inventory. You don't want to deal with books where unless you're dealing with an independent bookstore local where you know the owner, you're going to have a hard time if you self-publish getting that book in any kind of bookstore. So the hybrid model gets it into bookstores, handles all the bookstore sales, pays you a royalty, and gives you the right to do whatever you want to do with the book, and gives you a really good price to buy the book back. The third category is the self-published category. And the simplest way to think about self-publishing is not focus on the word publishing. Focus on the word self, because it's all up to you. You not only have to write it, but hopefully you'll be able to afford to get it edited. And if you've ever read some self-publishing books, you've read some that weren't edited, and you know what that's like. You also, if you can afford it, have to get a good cover. And you've seen a lot of self-published covers that you know what, you can pick them out. Which ones are self-published. Look inside. You can see the design, and it's awful. All those things cost money. $600-700 for a cover. 50,000 word manuscript's going to cost you $400, $500, $600 to get a copy edited. And a cover is going to cost you around $650 to $700. So it costs a fair amount of money. Figure at least $3,000 to do the edit and the design and the cover well with professionals. You can do it on your own, and it'll look like you did it on your own. But self-publishing, those are all the downsides. The upside is it's all up to you. You can decide what the title is. You can decide what the cover is. You can decide what kind of price point you want to put on it. You can decide the format. One of the nice things I like about it is, we have a self-publishing service we provide to clients. They'll come back, and modern business people or preachers, speakers, and they'll come back and say, wow, I got to get that chapter out of there. It's just not working. I said, great, send me the content. And in a couple of days, I can have that revised book out and available. If you went to a traditional house and said, I'd like to change chapter 13, they say, yeah, we'll get back to you on it. It's not going to happen. So traditional, you get royalty, you get the support, you get the credibility that an independent editor has said, this is really good. Hybrid, you get that same editorial support and bookstore representation. Self-publishing, you have total control, but you won't have it in bookstores. Now, if Amazon is selling 50 or 60% of the books anyway, that not being in bookstores is not as bad as it used to be, because there aren't that many bookstores left. So it's becoming more and more reasonable for people who can sell books. The average self-published book does about 250 copies. Most of the time, you need to be in the 400 or 500 range to break even. Copies sold. Most people who self-publish give most of their books away. And the people who say they buy them are the first ones who get them, mom and uncles, how the distribution goes. But whether it's traditional or hybrid or self-published, there are people who can help you with this. We do this. You got to have an agent, a literary agent. We can talk about that if you like. You have to have a literary agent if you're going to work with a traditional house. They won't talk directly to authors. And why won't they? They don't have the staff like they used to work with authors. They don't have the people to read manuscripts that are coming in as proposals. They trust the agents to filter the ones that make the most sense for that house. And I have a literary agency that I do that with. But so traditional, you got to sell it to the agent before you can sell it to the publisher. Hybrid, most of the hybrids will work directly because you're really a partner with them. And the self-publishing, you're on your own, other than having relationships that you can lean on, that you can develop to make sure that book he reads well and looks great. Almost up with our time, but I wanted Karen to just quickly close this section, because she's done traditional, she's done hybrid, and she's fixing to do self-publishing.
I've explained primarily why I've really enjoyed having traditional houses take care of the work that I've done, and I've enjoyed it, and I will continue to do it as often as they allow me to do it that way. But I did do one book as a hybrid, and I'm not sure if Bruce mentioned, but you have to pay into that as well.
Mm.
That's not totally royalty based. You pay the first maybe $3,000 to $5,000 into that. But I had a book that I did. In fact, it was the You Can Write Greeting Cards book that I did with F&W. And they did give me the rights back after the book had been out for 10 years. And so when I got the rights back, I updated it, revised it, because I offer an online course called You Can Write Greeting Cards, and I teach people how to do that. And so I wanted the book back on the market. So I did it with a hybrid publisher. They did an amazing job. It was just beautiful. I have books I'm very proud of. When I speak on that topic, I always take those books with me and sell them to my audience. I sell them to my students. And so for me, that was really a good choice to make, because it's a niche book. It's not a book that's going to have, hundreds of thousands of people interested. But for the kind of book it is, it needed to go to the right audience. And since they could put it back in the bookstore, I also liked that. So I did that book with a hybrid publisher, and it was really a great experience. I am, for the first time, and Bruce and I are just getting ready to launch 2 books that I am going to self-publish. But this time I'm self-publishing because I'm building a brand. And I want this brand to become bigger, as big as my brain can possibly think about how to make it big. I'm going after it. And so I want those books. I want to own those books. I don't want anybody else telling me when I can put out another one, or, what it has to look like or what it has to sound like. I know what I want it to be. I feel pretty impressed by what God wants me to do with it. And so this book, I'm just going to bite that bullet and go try it for the first time and say, okay, this deserves me to be everything. But I don't mind being everything. I want to be everything, because this is a baby that's, I just think, has to grow up. So I'm going to put it out there and do my best with it. So I'll let you know if it works. It'll be my first time trying to make that happen.
One of the things about traditional publishing, and Karen is a good example, as you all are, is that if this book that she mentioned is going to be published sometime this fall, it's still possible. She had 4 or 5 ideas that were spin-offs of that, and that she wanted to get contracted. So when the It's Still Possible really takes off, they've got other titles in the stream, right? Makes sense. Except that publishers don't think that way. They say, let's see if this first one goes, and then we'll get back to you on the second one, which means that you're going to lose a year and a half of time from the first book being published and getting some momentum, and then, not having anything else to put in the system. When you have a traditional publishing contract, they have control over your next book. And they don't even have to look at a proposal until 60 to 90 days after your first book is published. So you're on hold as a writer for a period of at least 90 days to even see a proposal, and then another year before it's published, which is another thing that caused Karen to decide to self-publish this new project, because it has 3 books she's going to bring out right away, and a traditional publisher would just do 1 and not commit to the other 2 until the first one works. But in the meantime, Karen couldn't do it either. So there's lots of pros and cons, lots of opportunities.